The Fletcher class was the single largest class of destroyers ever built, thanks mostly to the Wickes and Clemson classes being similar but divided into two separate entities. The Fletchers achieved a status that is near mythical in military procurement circles, being the right equipment, invented at exactly the right time, with plenty of room for expansion, and built in vast numbers. This tends to happen very rarely, and the machines that hit this mark, such as the Spitfire, the F-4 Phantom II, or as it's possibly starting to look, possibly even the Type 26 frigate, tend to become very well known. The Fletcher joined this select group in part due to sheer luck. The London Naval Treaty in 1930 had limited destroyers to 1,850 tons, and guns not exceeding 5.1 inches. And preceding US destroyer designs had wandered back and forth between this limit and a lower, approximately 1,500-ton figure. The problem with this limit, similar to the treaty limit on cruiser displacement, was that to build a ship with guns up to the maximum allowable caliber, which many nations did, tended to leave them both lacking in other departments and either dangerously top-heavy, or with little room for expansion, or both. For example, the immediately previous destroyer classes carried a similar main battery and torpedo armament, but would very rapidly lose guns and/or torpedo launchers, either just to keep the ships upright, or to make room for a meaningful anti-aircraft armament outside of angry words, beyond the main battery. Or, again, to do both. The Fletcher class benefited from being the first generation of destroyers the USN would design once the International Naval Treaty System had collapsed. Compared to the destroyers of many other nations, they also had to cope with long-range deployments across the Pacific, and initially when word got around that a larger destroyer was being designed, the proposed armament was listed as 5 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 12 torpedo tubes, and 28 depth charges, with speed requirements varying from 35 to 38 knots, along with an 18-inch increase in beam over previous designs. But this would simply have repeated the problems of the previous classes on a larger scale, and luckily this was reined in, with the final planned armament retaining the 5 single-mounted 5-inch guns, with 2 superfiring forward, 2 superfiring aft, and 1 just forward of the rear pair, on the other side of a light anti-aircraft platform. However, the 12 torpedo tubes were cut down to 2 quintuple torpedo launchers on the centre line, and an anti-aircraft armament of a quad 1.1-inch cannon mount and 6 single 50 caliber machine guns, along with 2 stern-mounted depth charge racks, which completed the loadout. This gave them the firepower to take on pretty much any foreign design, with only highly specialist ships having any kind of major advantage. For example, a tribal class outgunned a Fletcher quite significantly, but the Fletcher carried many more torpedoes. A number of Japanese destroyer classes carried many more torpedoes, but equally would be at a significant disadvantage in a gun duel, and so on. Displacing just over 2,000 tons at standard loading, their 60,000 shaft horsepower engines drove them through the water at just over 36 knots using a pair of screws, although some individual ships were faster. The reduction in armament compared to the initial plans, and the increased beam, left them very stable, with plenty of room to take upgrades. As a result, shortly after Pearl Harbor caused the United States Navy to make the managers of Bofors and Oerlikon very happy indeed, the Fletchers started to gain anti-aircraft armament along with more and more advanced radars, sonars, and fire control suites, without becoming overly compromised or losing any of their primary weapons or torpedo tubes. Depending on the ship, between 2 and 5 twin 40mm Bofors mounts, and typically 7 single 20mm Oerlikons plus half a dozen depth charge throwers would appear in relatively short order. Later in the war, as the Imperial Japanese Navy's surface threat was somewhat diminished, and the kamikaze threat was rapidly increasing, the ships would finally have to sacrifice something, with a number of them losing one of the quintuple launchers for a revised AA battery of 2 quad 40mm Bofors plus a twin mount, along with 7 single 20mm being swapped for 6 twin 20mm mounts, for a total of 27 anti-aircraft guns if you included the main battery. A very few would even reach the dizzying heights of 14 40mm barrels on a destroyer. They would also be the last primarily gun-based destroyers built by the United States Navy that used the single 5-inch mount. The derivative Sumner and Gearing classes were built using the ubiquitous 5-inch 38 caliber twin turret found on practically every US ship larger than a destroyer during World War II. Their only real weakness was the flush deck hull, which made them somewhat less seaworthy than was necessarily ideal, but this was not usually a problem in the typically calm waters of the Pacific. A total of 175 would be built, with 13 of the ships cancelled toward the end of the war. Casualties would amount to 19 sunk and 6 damaged beyond repair, in return for reaping a rather fearful toll of Japanese aircraft and not a few ships as well. 3 were actually built with aircraft catapults instead of the rear torpedo launcher and middle gun, but these were not considered a success and were converted back to their normal configuration fairly quickly. In addition to all of this, 52 of the ships would be sold after the war to a total of 14 different navies, including, ironically, the Japanese and West German forces, with the last active ships leaving service with the Mexican Navy in 2001. A total of 4 of the class are preserved. Kidd, Cassin Young and the Sullivans are in the United States, and the Velos, formerly USS Charette, is in Greece.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.